So what I'll try to do in this one is give a little bit of an overview like I did last time, but I might focus more on some of the lessons learned and leave a little bit more time for conversation. What I've rough notes for you about my kind of key takeaways, my lessons learned and resources. So I'm going to dump those in the chat at the very end of the conversation before we go back to the room. So you can just copy and paste everything. So we launched our company in 2018. We've done 3 investment rounds. Angel investment, that's your initial sort of investor. You'll get typically small amounts, like maybe $100,000 in total, often from people putting in $20,000 each. And that was through our existing network. We did another raise about 6 months later, which was around $300,000. So again, still from our network. We started to know some investors at that point. We've got a couple of external people on. They brought in a couple of friends, but it's investor network. And then we recently just closed. It's not public yet. We're still in the final stages, but around for close to $3 million, which was our first major in relationship with it all kind of investment round. So I think just to share some tips from my experience, I might sort of start with like a list of key takeaways. Current raise, we probably started really 18 months ago in terms of like starting to suss out investors, starting to get grants to help us with the funds needed to raise and to cover legal support. It was probably a year of really, once we started talking seriously to investors. And I would say the last month, these things take a lot longer than you think. And it's a really extended process. So just that's my first kind of takeaway. The second one is, you probably already heard, and it was in the last session, but this concept around ecosystem. The number of sort of investors is quite small, particularly if you've got an impact-focused business. People tend to know each other, which has its pros and cons. And one is that once you find your way into this environment, and the investors tend to work together a bit. So there are some advantages to being in a smaller pool. But the harder part to it is that people do tend to know everyone. There aren't as many as in other countries. And so it is really important to get into this, what they call the ecosystem. And there's a number of ways that you can do this. I mean, you can go out and hunt down individual investors, start relationships with them, ask them to introduce you to other investors. You can do an accelerator program. That's something we did. We did an accelerator program called StartMate. They helped us with our business development, but also helped us learn how to raise capital and also introduce us to investors. And there's a whole lot of different startup accelerator programs. All I would say on that is that some of them are wonderful and some of them are bordering on predatory in terms of how they work. So it's really important to talk to founders that have been through those programs before and to really understand more. And I think just as a really simple, clear line, if an accelerator program wants equity, they should only get that equity if they're investing in you. So any kind of accelerator program that wants a percentage of equity just for doing their program, or a percentage of equity for helping you with technology support or something like that, I would virtually rule that. I'll virtually rule that out. So look at those programs that are free or where they actually invest in you. And as an example, StartMate, the program that we did, invested $75,000 in us and brought us into the program for free. because they knew that by helping us through the program with an investment in us, their investment's going to increase. And that's a great relationship because it helps us, and it means that they're only going to get a payback if they do successfully help us to grow. My third point would be that you only really get one shot with an investor. And investors, some of the investors I spoke to were getting over 100 pitch decks a week. So they're getting 100 emails in their inbox every week asking for a coffee and sending a deck, which means you've only got one chance to have a great email written, have a really professional pitch deck, and you've got one shot at a first meeting to really make a solid impression. And I think what was talked a bit about in the previous meeting around confidence and women, some of the feedback I got from investors is actually, and I've heard men and women say this, that they prefer to invest in female founders because generally when we're pitching, we present more realistic targets. We're more honest about where our business is. We're more inclined to take on feedback, and these are traits they really like. But when you are pitching, you're pitching against guys that have often kind of inflated claims about their business like tenfold. And I had an investor that they were not, I decided in the meeting they were not values aligned to us. But as an example, I had one investor earlier on tell me, like, what are you presenting me with? You're presenting me with a business case that looks like something you're probably going to achieve. I don't want to see probable. I want to see possible. Like, you should have presented me like the moonshot possibility of what you can do. I didn't agree with that investor on that point, and I don't think we were values aligned. But you do need to remember that when you're doing things, you need to present yourself confidently with professionality, because you're entering this environment where investors are used to seeing very confident founders. It doesn't mean you have to be confident, by the way. Like, I'm not particularly confident. I didn't have high confidence going into this process. I had a lot of lacking of confidence, but I was able to, in each meeting, put on that front. And so you need to find a way to step into that yourself. And for me, that was really going back to my values and the impact on why I was doing the business, and reminding myself of that before every meeting, so that I went in and pitched my business as confidently as I could. And that's hard because often when you have a business, your business and you become one, and so a rejection of your business becomes. The point is that investment is a relationship, and just like a relationship, it's going to take a long time to nurture before somebody wants to really commit, and before you should really commit to someone. So you hear this concept called touch points, and often investors will want something like 6 to 8 touch points before they'll invest in you. So they'll want an initial coffee catch-up. If that coffee catch-up goes well, often they'll want to see how you're tracking. So they'll want to see, even if so that's why it's good going out early. So maybe even a year before you really want to raise money, but starting the conversation with people, sending them an update every month about how you're going, how you're tracking, if it does seem like they're interested, so they can kind of get a better sense of you. Just like sort of a marriage, in some countries do have on-the-day arranged marriages, but generally in Australia, that's something that would really shock us. And I think similarly with investment, it's a long-term relationship. You're starting with someone, and so they're going to really want to have that confidence around you, and you'll want that around them. I think where it does differ from a relationship is that you have investor documents that really set out the benefits and the pros and the cons, and so not the pros and the cons, but the benefits, who's paying what, who's responsible for what. And so one point I made before is that, there's some things in business when you make mistakes that you can easily undo, that you can look back at and laugh on. Signing any form of shareholders agreement or co-founder agreement is not one of those mistakes. You can literally end your chances of raising capital again if you sign documents that are predatory, not in your favour. And it's very hard to undo those things. So before signing anything with anyone, you need to really understand every single clause in that document and get your lawyers to explain it to you, and not accept anything that you don't agree with. So I think the other thing is, like, a no is not a setback. So if you go out and you've got a hit list of 50 investors and 40 say no, I think really trying not to take it personally. There's just lots of reasons that that you might not be right for an investor. And something that we did quite successfully was that even when people said no to us, if we felt like we had a good conversation, we asked them to, if there was anyone else in their network that might be interested, and we were able to get investment that way as well. So practically speaking, how did we do this raise? So we did the accelerator program. We met some investors through that. We learned more about how to get our deck, how to do a financial model, how to pitch ourselves. We then got some funding from Impact Investing Australia, and I'll put the link up in the message that I share. That's an organisation that's funded by the government and provides funding grants to businesses that have an impact and want to raise capital. And so we got a grant from that business, and that allowed us to hire someone to help introduce us to investors and hire someone to help with our deck and our financial model as well. But even with that money, it's so important that you have to understand all your numbers. You have to understand your deck. You need to hold those investor relationships. Don't let somebody else just hold them. And so, but that money was really useful for us and something I really recommend applying. I think similarly, when you get to the point where you've maybe done an accelerator or you've been to lots of different startup events about raising and you feel confident that you're ready to go, there are people that will help you raise for a commission, and I'd be really careful of those people. The right investors also won't want to see that part of the money they're giving you is going to go to paying a commission for somebody that introduced you to investors. So if you're getting people to support you, try to find people who will pay for a service. So you pay them for your legals, you pay them for your model, you pay them to help you with your deck. And often you can find these service providers that will help you, and you can arrange to pay them after you raise. And so I think the other thing is that if you in addition to startup accelerator programs, a good way that you can kind of get in and learn more is just by having a look in your state and territory for the organisations that are funded by the government that do a lot of different events. So in Victoria, we've got Startup Vic and Launch Vic, and they host lots of different networking events and events to learn about capital raising. So there's lots of opportunities out there. You just sort of have to hunt them down. And then I think try to find a group of other businesses that have raised, other female founders. So a network that we joined was one called One Line, that's Australia-wide. It was a great network for people to find other female founders who had raised, to find people that had been through the process and could help us. So we saw a lot of documents and processes from other companies that successfully raised. We were able to speak to other companies about who some of their investments were and go and approach those investors. So you really need to build up this network around you. And when you're outside of what they call the ecosystem, all of this just seems so massive and so confusing and so unpenetrable. But once you start getting in and going to a few events and meeting other founders, it'll all unfold for you. So I really encourage you to get involved that way. I might just leave it there, just a note on different ways of raising. So we raise from private investors. There is also crowd equity raising. You can raise debt as well, where you take on loans. What I would say in general is crowd equity raising can be really good, particularly if you have a product or service you're trying to sell to consumers, because then those investors become advocates for you. But it also can be a really expensive way of capital raising. So you typically have to pay quite a lot of the equity you get. And so traditionally, if you can find investors from private investors, it's probably going to be a much more cost-effective way. And there is a bit of a sense amongst the traditional investor environment that people that tend to crowd equity raise are people that couldn't get private investment. And so there is a bit of that stigma around it. So it's something to be careful of. Also making certain that if you are crowd equity raising, that your term sheet and your shareholder documents are written in a way that if you need private investment later on, that you're still going to be able to get it. So I might just leave there, and happy, for any comments. If you've got any comments, just throw them in. Otherwise, I will keep talking. Even if there's an area that you would like to know more about, if you'd like to learn more about, or just have me talk more about how we found investors or the process. Here we go. Someone's telling me. Oh. Okay, there's a few questions here. Yeah, so the first one, do you have any tips on raising capital without diluting too much? Yeah, so there's some sort of norms around this. Typically, you should dilute by about 20 to 25% each round. That's the norm. Now, if you have a really exciting astronomical business, then of course you can try to dilute for less. So if you're the next sort of Facebook, or if you're the next Canva, of course, if you've got a competing group of investors that all want to invest in you, then you don't have to dilute by 20%. But that is sort of the norm. The best way of not diluting too much is just having a whole lot of investors that are really keen. So one of the mistakes that we learnings from our most recent capital raise was that we started the process, we got a lead investor, we did the term sheet, and then we got other investors on board. In the end, we were oversubscribed. There were more people wanting to invest than we had space for. If we'd known that at the beginning, and if we rallied those people first, we probably could have played them off each other to not dilute too much. So yeah, I think that's kind of a key point, that not diluting by more than 20 to 25%. I think that points to valuation as well. So 20 to 25% dilution should, in your early years, determine your valuation. So if you're raising 2 million, then your business should be sort of valued at sort of 6 to 8 million, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I think valuation at the beginning is very much tied to what you're raising, which is weird. It's not relating to your traction, it's not relating to your sales. It's very much to do with how much you're raising. So if you raise more, you can have a higher valuation. And so question for, in 5 years' time, what kind of impact and shift in systems do you think Verve will have made? Well, something we really want to do at Verve is start to invest our member superannuation in female founders as well. So I really hope that we can shift the ecosystem a little bit like that, and particularly around impact focused investments. So when we were raising capital as an impact business, what we found was that still a lot of the impact investors have the same sort of terms as normal investors. So they want all the terms and all the conditions, but then they want impact as well. And so something we would love to see is, I guess, really a change in that approach, and a change in how we look at investing. Now, I just popped into the questions, or like my notes and all my resources. So we've got about 30 seconds left. So if you've been in this call and there's things you want to follow up, just go into the questions and do a quick copy paste so that you can copy those. And otherwise, connect with me on LinkedIn. And yeah, I think just get out there, start talking to more female founders, start finding a good tribe that you can be part of.